The alien princess moaned his name, and a human's touch broke every sacred law of her people. The night had never felt so heavy, nor the silence so dangerous. As the human soldier moved quietly through the towering corridors of the alien palace, his heart pounding like a drum caught between defiance and temptation, because he knew that somewhere beyond those obsidian walls, past the shimmering veils of blue fire guarding the sanctum, lay the alien princess who had haunted his dreams since the war began, the one whose eyes burned like molten silver, and whose voice lingered like smoke in his lungs, forbidden, untouchable, sacred by every law of her people. Yet the more he tried to forget her, the more she pulled him in until resisting her was like resisting gravity itself. And when the guards turned away, when his body pressed against cold stone, he slipped inside the chamber where she waited, her body half lit by moonlight pouring through the crystalline ceiling, the thin silk of her gown clinging to her every curve. Her lips parted as though she had expected him all along, and he froze, torn between reverence and hunger, between the fear of punishment and the raw ache of desire burning under his skin, because every tale whispered among soldiers warned that touching her was punishable by death, that her name could not even be spoken in desire. Yet here she stood, bare feet against polished glass, her gaze catching his. And in that look he saw not the royal command of a ruler but the trembling, desperate need of a woman who had been starved of freedom, starved of touch, starved of the very thing she had seen in his eyes the first time their worlds collided. And when she spoke his name, his simple human name, like a plea wrapped in fire, he felt his knees weaken because no alien, not even one bound by sacred bloodlines, should have known how to make a human feel worshipped and devoured in the same instant. And he whispered her title, daring not to break the last line between them, but she silenced him by stepping closer, her hand trembling as it reached for his chest, pressing against the racing heart beneath his uniform. And though his training screamed to pull back, to protect her from ruin and himself from execution, he found his hand lifting, fingers brushing the line of her jaw, the heat of her skin so alive, so electric, that the air between them seemed to tremble, and she let out the faintest sound, half a moan, half a sigh, her lips so close to his ear that when she whispered his name again, it felt like lightning carving through every boundary that had ever been drawn between their species, every treaty, every sacred law, every warning, all dissolving into nothing as her body pressed against his, silken warmth meeting human strength. And in that collision of need, the world outside no longer existed. No war, no empires, no guards, only the pounding heat of their hearts and the shared desperation to feel something that was forbidden. And though part of him feared the consequences, the way her body trembled against his told him that she feared nothing in this moment except being denied, that the alien princess who had been raised as untouchable, unreachable, revered like a living goddess, was now shattering her own people's laws with a single moan of his name, and the sound of it undid him, pulling him deeper, making him trace the delicate line of her neck with his lips, the faint glow of her skin reacting to every human touch as though his very presence rewrote her biology, her nails digging lightly into his chest as though she could anchor herself against the tidal wave of desire, threatening to pull them both under. And though the palace outside still pulsed with alien chants, though execution waited for him if anyone discovered what was happening in this chamber, he could not step back, he could not stop himself. Because the alien princess was not commanding him with royal decree. She was begging him with the raw honesty of passion, her body betraying the sacred vows that bound her, her voice breaking the silence with sounds that made him forget who he was and what world he came from. And as his lips hovered just inches from hers, he realized that this moment was not just dangerous, it was irreversible, that the instant their mouths met there would be no undoing it, no pretending it never happened, no turning away. And when her lips finally found his, soft and trembling, yet charged with the force of 1,000 suns, every fear burned away, leaving only the fire of a desire so forbidden it could destroy them both. Yet in that kiss, in the way her body melted against his chest, he knew he would gladly be destroyed if it meant being consumed by her once more. The air in the chamber felt heavy with the kind of tension that broke kingdoms, as if every carved wall, every shimmering stone, every symbol of power etched into the alien palace trembled under the weight of what they had already done. And yet when the human soldier pulled back just far enough to look at her face, he found no regret in the alien princess's silver eyes, only hunger, only longing, only the undeniable truth that she had wanted this for longer than either of them could admit. And as her breath came uneven, lips parted, skin glowing faintly with the bioluminescence of her kind, he realized that she was more than a symbol of sacred law. She was a woman who had spent her entire life trapped in perfection, surrounded by cold reverence, worshipped by millions, but never once touched with the honesty of desire, never once kissed with the rawness of need. And he could not unsee the way her body pressed tighter to his, the way her voice broke when she whispered his name again, so soft it could have been a prayer or a curse, yet it fell on him like fire. And though every instinct told him to step back, to protect her from the ruin they were inviting, he found his hands tightening at her waist, pulling her closer until their hearts thudded together in frantic unison, until the warmth of her body was so consuming he could no longer distinguish where she ended and he began. And when his lips trailed down the line of her throat, she let out a sound so forbidden, so dangerous, that even the walls seemed to recoil, because that sound was not meant to exist within these halls, not from her, not for him. And still she made it again, trembling under his touch, gripping his uniform as if her strength, her entire royal bloodline, had been stripped away in the heat of his mouth against her skin. And when he lifted his head to meet her eyes, he saw not fear but defiance, as though she dared the universe itself to stop her from wanting him. It was then he understood the truth, that this was no accident, no fleeting weakness, no slip in her self-control. She had chosen this, chosen him, chosen to break the sacred law written in the marrow of her people, chosen to risk exile, punishment, execution, for the sake of one human's touch. And as her hand slid up to his neck, pulling him into another kiss, desperate, breathless, all-consuming, he let the weight of those choices sink into him, and it both terrified and thrilled him, because now he knew that what burned between them could never be hidden, never be undone. And once they left this chamber, the universe itself might come crashing down on them. Yet in that moment, as she pressed against him, her moans vibrating against his lips, he could not find it in himself to care. He kissed her harder, slower, deeper, until she gasped his name like she was drowning, and he was the air she had been denied all her life. And her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, demanding more, and he gave her everything, every ounce of his restraint shattering as he lifted her, feeling her legs wrap around his waist with a hunger that proved this was no fragile, fleeting desire. It was a wildfire, fierce and consuming, and neither of them wanted to escape. The palace outside carried on in ritual, with guards marching in distant corridors and priests chanting words of reverence, but the alien princess, the untouchable jewel of her empire, was here in his arms, whispering broken fragments of longing between gasps of pleasure, her voice shaking with desperation as she begged him not to stop, begged him to keep giving her the forbidden touch that unraveled centuries of law with each stroke of his hand, each graze of his lips. And he marveled at her, at how someone who carried such power, someone who had been raised as a living goddess, now trembled under the touch of a man born in the mud of Earth's wars, a man who should have been beneath her notice, but who now carried her entire world in his arms, and he could not decide if he was saving her or destroying her. And then, in a fleeting moment of clarity, he realized she was the one leading him deeper into this forbidden fire, that every gasp, every moan, every trembling word of his name was her declaration of rebellion against the laws that chained her. And though he wanted to believe he had power here, he knew the truth. She had chosen him, and in choosing him, she had rewritten her destiny and perhaps his. She pulled back for a heartbeat, resting her forehead against his, her silver eyes glistening with both lust and something deeper, something vulnerable. And when she spoke, her voice cracked with truth. "If they find out, they will kill you, and they will strip me of everything." Her words should have struck him with fear, should have frozen him into silence, but instead he cupped her face, forcing her to look only at him, and whispered, "Then let them, because I would rather die in your arms than live a lifetime without this." The confession broke something in her, because her lips trembled into a smile, fragile and radiant, before she crushed her mouth to his again, this time with a ferocity that spoke of years of restraint tearing apart all at once. And as their bodies tangled and the world outside faded, they both knew there was no turning back, that the first kiss had been the beginning, but this hunger, this surrender, this reckless abandonment of law and consequence was the point of no return, the moment that would change everything. And though the walls of the palace still stood tall, though armies still marched in her name, though sacred scrolls still bore her bloodline as divine, in this chamber she was not a princess, not a goddess, not the untouchable daughter of stars. She was simply a woman who moaned his name with every shiver of desire, and he was the man who answered her with every forbidden touch. And together they tore apart the silence that had held them captive, leaving only fire in its place. The morning light did not bring peace, it brought judgment, spilling through the crystalline ceiling like liquid fire, illuminating the chamber where two bodies lay entangled, where sweat and silk and whispered names had turned sacred ground into a place of sin, and as the human soldier stirred awake, his arms still locked around the alien princess, he felt the weight of the universe settle back on his chest, heavier than her warm, trembling body pressed against him. Because outside this door, the sacred laws still waited, cold and merciless, and he knew that one sound, one shadow, one misstep would bring soldiers crashing down upon them, swords at his throat, chains around her wrists. Yet when he looked down and saw her face half buried against his chest, her lips still swollen from kisses that had lasted until dawn, her skin glowing faintly with that ethereal radiance only her kind possessed, he felt no fear, only a deep, dangerous calm, as if nothing else mattered so long as she remained in his arms. She stirred then, her silver eyes opening, her breath uneven as she blinked against the light, and when her gaze found his, she smiled, a small, fragile thing, but one that carried more rebellion than any army could muster. She whispered his name softly, reverently, and the sound tore him in half because it was beautiful and damning at once, the reminder that he had not dreamed the night before, that he had truly touched what no human should have touched, kissed what no lips should have claimed, and that now, no matter how hard they tried, there would be no going back, for her body still bore the marks of his hunger, and his soul still carried the echo of her moans, and the laws of her people could never unwrite what had already burned into existence between them. But the silence that had wrapped them like a cocoon cracked suddenly, footsteps echoing through the outer corridor, harsh, unyielding, and both of them froze, their bodies tensing as the sound of armored boots and clipped voices drew closer, the words sharp in her tongue, the language of authority and suspicion. And for the first time since she had given herself to him, the alien princess's face faltered, her lips parting with fear, her chest rising faster against his because she knew what he did, that they had been discovered, or at least suspected, and that no excuse, no lie, could conceal the truth written across her body, glowing faintly where his hands had traced her, her very skin betraying the passion of the night. He reached for his weapon, though it would mean nothing against an empire, but she caught his hand and shook her head, her voice breaking as she whispered, "No, if they see you, they will kill you before you can draw breath." He looked at her then, searching her eyes for some way out, some path that would save them both. But there was none, only the impossible choice between surrender and defiance, between running and staying, between death and a love too dangerous to live. The voices outside grew louder, the knock at the chamber door thunderous, and her body flinched against his, but before he could speak, before fear could consume her, the alien princess stood, her silk gown sliding down over bare skin, her eyes flashing with the fire of someone who had chosen long ago, and she whispered with such conviction it silenced even his panic. "Then let them see. Let them see that I am not their goddess, not their untouchable queen-to-be. Let them see that I am a woman, and that I have chosen you." His heart clenched, torn between awe and terror, because she was not just risking exile, she was declaring war on her entire bloodline, and on the sacred laws that held her empire together. Yet before he could stop her, she strode to the door and flung it open, and the guards, cloaked in black steel, their alien weapons gleaming with lethal precision, froze at the sight before them, their princess, hair unbound, lips bruised from human kisses, skin glowing with the unmistakable heat of passion, and behind her the human soldier, bare-chested, defiant, his eyes locked on her like she was the only thing in the galaxy worth dying for. The silence that followed was suffocating, a silence filled with the weight of shattered law, of betrayal, of rebellion. And then came the gasps, the curses, the clashing of blades drawn in rage. The captain stepped forward, voice cold with fury, declaring that the sacred vows had been broken, that the punishment was death for him, and eternal dishonor for her. And though his hand went to his weapon, though instinct screamed to fight, it was the alien princess who spoke, her voice ringing through the hall with a clarity that silenced even the most hardened warrior. "No," she said, her silver eyes burning, her body trembling but unyielding. "It is not dishonor to love. It is not shame to feel. I am more than your law. I am more than the chains you wrapped around my name. And if you wish to kill him, then know this. You kill the only truth I have ever chosen for myself." Her words struck like thunder, echoing through the chamber, shaking the men who had never heard their princess speak as anything less than divine decree. And for a heartbeat the world stood still. The soldier stepped forward then, placing himself between her and the drawn blades, his chest bare, his hands steady, and his voice low but unbreakable as he said, If you take her from me, you'll have to cut me down first, and I will not fall quietly." The guards hesitated, torn between their loyalty and the sight of a princess who had shed her divinity to stand beside a mortal. And in that hesitation, in that fragile pause, something shifted, because the sacred law had already been broken, and no blade could undo what had happened in the night. Some looked away, unwilling to strike, while others raised their weapons higher. But before blood could be spilled, the alien princess stepped fully into the light, took the human's hand in hers, and laced their fingers together where all could see, and whispered so that every soldier, every servant, every unseen eye would hear, "I would rather burn with him than live untouched among the stars." The words were blasphemy, but they were also a truth so radiant it could not be denied. And in that moment the fate of kingdoms cracked. Some guards lowered their blades, shaken by the raw defiance of their princess. Others turned away in silence, unwilling to kill what love had dared to rise against their gods. And though the threat of exile and war hung in the air, though the empire itself trembled with the weight of betrayal, the human soldier felt her hand tighten in his, her warmth anchoring him against the storm, and he realized that no matter what came next, death, battle, exile, or rebellion, they had already won, because they had chosen each other against everything. And when she turned to him in front of them all, pressing her lips to his one final time, her moan of his name echoing through the sacred halls, the universe itself seemed to split open, law shattering, silence broken, as love claimed victory over fear.